You were talking about meeting Jonathan Harvey and interviewing him.
Jonathan was pretty well the first film that I made without the support of an institution. That's to say, I made it with my own money. And it derived out of going to see Jonathan, who I knew already. He was a neighbour here down in Sussex, and going asking if I could talk to him. And he said, of course, yes. And out of it came 2 hours of the most amazing material. And I thought, now, this is going to kick a film off. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you look at some composers and you say, yeah, it's very good, but I don't think I can see my way to make it. And after all, at my age, I can't make everything I want to make, for goodness sake. Some of those things, like Jonathan Harvey, began as a simple interview in his workroom at the back, and simply expanded. And then, when I'd been through the material, I could think, right, now we can actually start using music, because I don't believe a music film exists until there's music in it. I would hate to make a film which had no music in it and which called itself a music film. Ridiculous. So it was that we then developed it, and I finished the film Towards and Beyond for his 70th birthday. There is, you probably don't know this, but there is a kind of extra bit. When he was 72, which was his last birthday, I made a film called 80 Pictures for Jonathan Harvey, based on an orchestral piece which he had premiered in Tokyo, called 80 Breaths for Tokyo. And I took the material which I had shot for the documentary, and I simply made a film which was 80 shots long. There are one or two cases where there's a combination of shots to make one shot, but it was 80, and that was completely reworked. So none of the music from the documentary was in there, but this piece, which was a very new piece, which he'd had premiered in Tokyo, and was in fact, I think, his last purely orchestral piece. You may have worked on it. I don't know.
I didn't work on that. No.
Anyway, so I thought it'd be interesting to see what happens if you juggle things. And there is this pool of material, which of course you can never use all of it, and maybe we can get something else out of it, which we tried to do.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful film. It's lovely because it's like poetic, isn't it? And the images are musical.
That's exactly what. I mean, Jonathan was delighted with it, and it was just in time. Oh, just in time. I can't remember exactly when he died, but I think it might have been December, or autumn. The birthday was in May, and he was thrilled to bits with it. And he very kindly got in touch with me and said, first of all, he insisted on giving me a score of the latest, that in fact turned out to be the last piece.
Plain Songs for Peace and Light.
Yeah.
That was the one I worked on.
Yes. Well, in the published score, there's a dedication from Jonathan, written poor old thing with his, like a demented spider. He barely could hold a pen. It's a heroic act even to hold one. Yeah. So I was glad he got that, and he said, a lifetime's experience distilled into a poem. And I said, is that your description of yourself? He said, no, it's my description of you. Which I thought was very kind of him, very kind.
Beautiful, yeah, but apt as well.
He was a lovely man to work with. I still occasionally make contact with Rosa. She's okay. She got over it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Because I was watching the short introduction to the broadcast of Madonna of Winter and Spring, and I think some of the images from that may have ended up in the 80 pictures, possibly.
I steal. Remember what Swansea said? I don't borrow, I steal.
But I really loved that because it was it's Harvey at his best, speaking very, very clearly about
I
really
thought it was
complex
wonderful. It was the beginning. There's sometimes you meet somebody, and it clicks right from the very beginning. Some others it might take a slightly longer time, but with Jonathan, he was so ready to talk, and there we shot all that material in with all those massive machines, which are now all reduced in size.
I would say something about that because you were saying that to me the other day about the kit. Because there were like 5 people, weren't there, on the mixing desk, including Jonathan Harvey.
I think there were 5, yeah.
Madonna of Winter and Spring,
right,
at the Proms in about 1986, which you filmed.
I did.
Yeah.
It was really quite hard to do it because it didn't proceed like any orchestral piece, modern or otherwise, which I knew of before. So I realised it was going to be static. More or less static. And mostly I don't really want to put images or paintings or pictures or landscapes into a performance of a piece of music. The piece of music is the piece of music. But on this occasion, it seemed as if it summoned up something. So the shot of the Albert Hall with all those discs, which looked like a version of the universe really, it was and then those images which I found of the Madonna, and that he liked it. I can't remember who introduced it now.
Jane Glover.
Was it really Jane? Good Lord. She was one of the best presenters, I should say, for music programs. The other one was Sue Cook, terrific, who used to be married to John Williams, the guitarist. And well,
but you were saying about you were filming because the introductory piece to the actual performance of the piece is really interesting. It sets the scene. And you were talking about it's a wonderful document of the equipment that was being used at the time. And you were saying that
that's right. It was huge.
Enormous.
You wouldn't have scale all in here. No.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing which I remember very distinctly was going to IRCAM in Paris and watching the first rehearsals of the Boulez Répond. And they had this vast desk. I exaggerate, but it felt as if it was the length of a cricket pitch. It was certainly it was several meters anyway. And all of these people doing things. And at the very end was a little espresso machine, which they did use. But what is so fascinating is that by the time we did the George Benjamin film, things were beginning to get a little more compact. And you can do his piece Towards Antara with basically a kit on a table like you have here. Amazing, which of course released it from one of the great problems about electronic music or music which uses electronics is that to carry it around is a bit of it can be a disaster. Also, sometimes the technical expertise of concert halls is really quite disastrous. Anyway, it was fascinating to see how technique, as in most things in life, after all, we carry on our wrists a sort of computer, actually. It's and the idea of actually walking around with something that can do all sorts of things for you. I'm well behind the curve on this because I'm not any good at it. I mean, it's too late. It's too late. My children, yeah, fine. My grandchildren even much better than me. But you know, I'm not. I decided it was like running for a bus. There comes a point in your life when it's no good running for a bus. You will simply have a heart attack or fall over or something. And so I gave up running for buses long before I needed to give up running, because I thought, then I'll just coast into this. I'll be quiet and easygoing. Not very easygoing really, but still. Anyway, but the notion of doing interviews with composers, or rather getting them to talk to me, there isn't a word. I was the interviewer. I happen to dislike the word interviewee. Sounds made up word, really. But you would get, and some of them were fascinating, some were very difficult, or found it difficult to express themselves. Interesting enough, it was very often composers who had difficulty composing, who would, I mean, take Hugh Wood, for example, who's on that list. Hugh was a fine composer, but he'll seek almost any opportunity to not write a piece. And he's now 87, so I think that's now kind of over. But some of them, for example, Julian Anderson was very good, but I didn't see from what he was saying, good as it was, that there was the material for a kind of documentary. This material is unedited. All these composer interviews are unedited, deliberately so, because it seems to me that archive, if you ever look into an archive, just at the moment you want, or just a moment after you want to make the cut, or before you make the cut, they've gone and made a cut as well. Disaster. So I thought, leave it all alone, let it all hang out, and if people want to you may reuse it, and I hope they will. One of the people who was, it was surprising, because there were some people who were just marvellous at it. And Anthony Payne, for example, wonderful. He spoke so eloquently about growing up in a house without music, and suddenly hearing Brahms' First Symphony and thinking, good Lord, I want to be a composer. And a little bit of self-publicity, Julian Anderson saying to me, I was 14 and I saw a film that you made about Bartók, Miraculous Circumstance, in fact.
Which we have.
Yes. Yeah. And it's what made me want to be a composer. And I said, wow, that is, that's quite something, actually. And he said it elsewhere as well, in fact. And even Judith Weir once said to me something. I said, I've been fiddling around with a piece that I did with Boulez, the music with strings, percussion and celeste of Bartók, and a first movement. Oh, she said, I saw that when I was at school. She said, it's one of the things that really made me decide to be a composer. I said, wow, I'm responsible for two people.
That's impressive. That's really great.
But not actually entirely. Of course, they had their other.
Well, there's lots of truth in it. I mean, I happened to see the Dust in the Road film of Finney,
Michael,
which for me was kind of prophetic, because I ended up studying with him and worked with him very closely over quite a long time, actually. So that was also fantastic.
When he lived down at Steyning.
Stunning, that's right. And then before that, I knew him when he was in Brunswick Square in Brighton.
Yes, that's where I filmed the interview with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, that would be wonderful to see that as well.
Have you not got it?
I don't know. I'm sure we haven't.
Well, that's all right.
But I'll send you an email
send me a
with a request. Can I ask the sort of corny question? So, could you say how?
Would you like a corny answer?
Yeah. Well, up to you. But could you say how you, just in case this is ever interesting for people who are exploring the archive, how did you get into filmmaking and working with composers?
Getting into filmmaking was the only thing I ever wanted to do. I had two interests in my life from mid-teens. One was music, and it was always modern music. I can't tell you why, it's just what I liked. The first shellac 78s I bought with pocket money was in about 1947, and it was a piece that was less than 2 years old, and it was a 4C interlude from Peter Grimes. My father said, "That's rather modern, isn't it?" I said, "Not to me, it isn't." So there was always this passionate interest in music, and also a terrible appetite for getting hold of it and exploring it and getting more of it. And that and filmmaking. I, like a lot of filmmakers, I sat in some afternoon cinema watching Citizen Kane thinking, blimey, it can be like this. Well, I never was like that, of course, but it sort of came together. Humphrey Burton was the key figure. I was working as an assistant editor at Ealing at the BBC's film department. I was assistant to a man called Alan Tyra, who used to edit all Ken Russell's early films. So I got to know Ken, which was an interesting experience. And we had Humphrey got hold of me one day. He said, "You went to university, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "What are you doing walking around carrying cans of film?" This was how the BBC officers and men in those days, very much so, much more even than now. He said, "How would you like to work on music programs? We're just starting BBC Two." I said, "Well, I'm not a musician." "It doesn't matter." He said, "I'm surrounded by musicians who can't make films, and maybe it'll work the other way around." So I was duly transferred to BBC Two with the music. It was called, I think, Music and Documentaries in those days. It kept on changing its formation, but anyway, that was what it was. And up came various things, and you started learning, basically by making mistakes like anybody else would. And then the key moment, I guess, was Humphrey coming in, again Humphrey, still alive, I'm happy to say, coming into my office one day and saying, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I said, "Not much." "Why?" He said, "Well, come with me to Maida Vale. BBC Symphony Orchestra are rehearsing, and there's a conductor there who I think is interesting." So we travelled down there, and I can remember it very well. There was a mezzo or contralto called Joanna something, singing the Schoenberg Opus 22 songs. The conductor, you will have guessed by now, was Boulez. So there was a pause in the rehearsals, and we went to his room, and Humphrey introduced himself and said, "How would you like us to make a film about your music?" And Pierre, who was always a very polite man, said, "I would like that very much." "Right," he said, and he turned to me and said, "There you are, Barry, make it." And I knew nothing, like the man in the Fawlty Towers. I knew nothing. And it went rather well, and it had, and that started a kind of relationship that went on for 40
And
years.
what was the title of that first film with Boulez?
It was called Portrait Artist Performance. We were all very much into Brechtian titles and Godardian expressions in those days. So films that came in chapters and whatever. That was the thing. Which this was, and there's an interview, and then there's a rehearsal, and then there's a performance of this Mallarmé piece. And when he came to the BBC on a more permanent basis, we started to make films. His point was that you won't understand the present unless you understand something about the past. So that's why the films on Schoenberg, Berg and Webern were made, and Stravinsky and Bartók. And gradually we accumulated. We never made a series. I've always been bothered by series because everyone talks all the time about a house style or something, and that seems to me the most boring thing you possibly talk about. So they were all separate films, but they all had him, of course, the leading position in it. And we went on doing that for about 12 years, I suppose. 12 or 13 years, I suppose. Then there was a gap of 5 or 6 years, and then he came to London to do the first version of Répond, which of course was a phenomenal sort of complication. And so we filmed that with 6 cameras, I remember, and still managed to miss a lot of things. Anyway, I have this memory of Pierre saying, eventually finishing the piece and saying, looking at his watch and then looking at his band, and said, "Il y a des erreurs monumentales." We must do it all again. Sorry, Barrie. I left all that in, including sorry, Barrie. Because you could hear me saying, "Oh, God." And then, I suppose, there was a fairly long period. When he ceased to be Flavour of the Month for the BBC, the films tended to disappear. Well, not to be made, I mean. So it eventually we met partly at his 80th birthday, and one of the films which is on your list, Living in the Present, was made as a celebration of his 80th birthday. It started off as a short film, and a bit like one of his pieces, it grew and it grew. And the head of music at the BBC in those days was a man called Peter Manura, and he said, "Oh, I love it." I said, "When are you going to show it?" He said, "Oh, when he dies." I said, "That's a bit sad. Couldn't we?" Anyway, it went into the archive. I had a copy, of course. Lesson 1: when you finish a film, always make sure you've got a copy, whatever happens. Don't rely upon anybody else. And we got this, I had this copy, and the Alder Festival said that they would like to show it. They had to ask the permission of the BBC, who said there is no such film. And the commissioning editor rang me up and said there's no film because there's no paperwork, which is the perfect bureaucratic answer, isn't it?
It certainly is.
I said, well, you're talking to someone who doesn't exist because I made the film.
So this was actually relatively recently, wasn't it? When
it was about
died.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago, and I think, of course, they set to finding it, and there it was in the video archive. Well, where else would it be, for goodness sake? Anyway, we solved that problem.
So which film was that? The one that
it's Living in the Present.
Living in the Present, right? So that hasn't actually been screened?
Never been televised, ever.
But it's just shown at the Aldeburgh Festival.
That's right.
So it's a pretty unique film at the moment, anyway.
Well, it is, yes. Only, let's face it, he's not going to get any older. And this one is a German version.
Yeah.
I've left it with an English title.
Yeah.
It was a German Arte, that's the German-French co-producers.
Yeah.
And its French title was À la recherche du temps futur. I was into Proust at the time.
Yeah.
And that's in German, in fact, but
Right.
the BBC didn't want to collaborate with German television. In fact, they never answered the letter.
Oh, it's a shame.
Well, it happens. So I made this film, which unfortunately the head of SWR, Southwest German Television, insisted that it had to be in German. Well, Ulla speaks very good German, but the net result was that it couldn't ever be shown anywhere else because German, surprise, surprise, is not a world language. It has certain things in it which are not in the English one, and vice versa, of course. So they kind of complement one another a bit. The German version has Boulez conducting Parsifal at Bayreuth.
It's a bit of a gem then as well.
Well, the pit at Bayreuth is just extraordinary. It's built rather like an underground station, which it is effectively. It slopes away from the conductor, downwards, not upwards. And by the time you get to the double basses, they're well under the stage. And of course there's this great cowl which comes over the top, so you don't see the orchestra. We wanted to film him conducting. They were doing Parsifal, a very unsuccessful production. Apparently, I never saw it because we were down shooting the prelude. There was one small problem, which is the prelude in the opera version goes straight into the first scene. There's no conclusion, so we were stuck. We'd done our 9 minutes, and we had to wait an hour and a half before we could get out. And the first act came to an end, and you could hear loud booing from the audience, and Boulez standing there with his arms folded and laughing away. And he eventually came out and he looked at me and said, "Well, you survived then." Yes. But I'm sorry to have lost that. Well, I haven't lost it, it exists, but he was a wonderful collaborator because he didn't suffer from the kinds of grandeur which certain people do. Not at all. In fact, the way to get him cross was to call him maestro or maître. He said, "I hate that, don't do that." So you didn't do it.
I noticed that he never wore tails when I used to watch his, and I thought that was quite in the talking about the sort of 1980s or 90s whenever I used to see him in action. That was still quite unusual.
Oh yes, and indeed, I mean, he would be a jacket, somebody, I saw a review of some singer who'd sung under the baton of Pierre Boulez. I thought, that's a neat trick. Where did they see that? He didn't use a baton. I think probably my favourite conductors have always been the conductors who are very precise, and that, because their precision helps the orchestra, but it also helps me in directing something. It would be Boulez, it would be Nussen, it would be the late Michael Gielan, who died a few months ago, all of whom did not want to put on a sort of theatrical spectacle in the way they reacted to the music, but who just made sure it was all in place, which was quite enough. When I was preparing, for example, a Mahler symphony for a concert broadcast, though it probably wasn't being conducted by Boulez, it might have been conducted by also any number of other people. I always used the Boulez recording because it was clearer than anything else. And it was not smeared over with Bernstein-like sweat and tears and whatever. It was just very, very clear, and that's what I needed. Anyway,
you mentioned Nussin. Do you mind if I ask you a little bit about Nussin?
Of course.
Because he's another interesting person that you work with quite extensively. Is that right?
Well, we did a number of things. He appeared in a program about the early years of Britain called Young Apollo, and he was in the introduction to a Simon Rattle show called A Symphony in Time of War. I remember it very distinctly because I went down to Glyndebourne, and the night before had been the first performance of Higgledy Piggledy Pop, and Ollie had made himself thoroughly ill at the party afterwards, and eventually was persuaded down from his bedroom. He arrived, and he and Simon sat on this green sofa, and honestly, Ollie was as green as the sofa. It was just extraordinary. But he was always full of information. One of the great things about Ollie was that he's quite liable to open a conversation with you by saying, I found a Turkish composer who sounds just like Szymanowski, and you think, what on earth can that be like? But he was a great collector and phenomenally precise. So the film, which was made for his 50th birthday, got re-shown at Aldborough this year because it was sadly the anniversary of his death. And he was a curious man in many ways because he was extremely genial, wonderful sense of humour, a passion for mechanical toys, which was like Ravel really, and at the same time very, very separate from everyone. You couldn't go and knock on his door by chance and say, hello, how are you? He didn't want that at all. Perhaps not surprisingly, he died alone. I was found dead alone. But it's an extraordinary story with Ollie because he knew too much about music. I don't know whether you find this yourself, but the more you know about something, sometimes the less free you feel to actually do whatever. And in Ollie's case, I think he was always looking at his latest piece, insofar as it existed at all, and saying, no, I don't think that really works. Stravinsky wouldn't have done that, or so-and-so wouldn't have done that. And then he throws it away and says he'd start again. There are a number of unfinished pieces, one of which, a big orchestral piece, was written for the Cleveland Orchestra, and it's called Cleveland Pictures, and it's a kind of modern version of Pictures for an Exhibition. He wrote 4 of the 7 movements and then gave up, and that was 20 years ago. And it's still there in their library, waiting for someone to dust it off and do a Mahler 10 on it, you know. And he was a very private man, at the same time being enormous in every respect, enormously talented, but also enormous in size. He looked like a sort of cheerful Orson Welles at times, you know.
And can I also ask you one more?
Please.
One more question.
Whatever.
One more. Takamitsu.
Yes.
It very intrigues me. I know Takamitsu's work very well, but I've always sort of instantly responded to the extraordinary sound world of this composer.
Yes.
Again, how did you? Because you've made a couple of films with?
I regret to say quite a few.
Quite a
actually,
few.
Yes.
Obviously, that was a really
important. Interesting you should say that because it began from a radio broadcast by Ollie Nussin. There was a thing that used to be called Music in Our Time, then became Here and Now. Right. Was Simon Holt called it Ear and Ache. But it was there was Ollie did a program about Toru. Very good program too, about how the music was made up, not continuously, but made up of pictures with pauses between them. And I found it absolutely riveting, as I did the music, of course. And I was given the opportunity to, by Dennis Marks, to doing a series called From East to West, and one of the episodes would be a performance of a piece by Simon, CBSO, A Flock Descends into the Pentagonal Garden. It's a lovely piece. And we were allowed to go and film for a week in Japan with him. And it was just lovely. It worked. He was a man of eccentric charm. He spoke English quite well, but erratically, basically, so I let him talk in Japanese. And nodded when I thought it was the right time to nod, because I had no idea what he was saying. And we shot most of it around his home up in the hills, about 3-hour journey from Tokyo. And I mean, like you, I found the music utterly, well, wonderful is the only word that comes to mind. It glowed, and it was like some wonderful backlit painting. And of course, painting was very important to him. One of the reasons for the pauses in the music were he said it was like the frame around a picture, or indeed the space beyond the frame, and that you would let that breathe and then move on to something else. And we did 2 films. We did one called 13 Steps Around Toru Takemitsu, which I think you might have there. And then there was another one in a series called Sinfonietta 2, which was written by Paul Crossley and played by him. It was a piece called River Run for piano and orchestra, conducted by Ollie, as it happens. It was I think those were the 2 films we did, in fact.
That's great.
But I've used his music in 1 or 2 of the little short films that I've done, which there's a piece. The most recent piece is a film called Rain Spell, which takes the title from Toru for a quintet, in fact. In Wales you get quite a lot of that. Not quintets, I mean rain.
Oh, thank you.
Not at all.
You've done so many every single project seems extraordinary in terms of the interest and the historical fascination of it. Are there any particular projects that just stand out in terms of the memory of making them?
A lot of it has to do with what kind of time you had making the film. There are 1 or 2 films which sometimes what you think you have done rather well, nobody likes it. It happens, and nothing you can do about it. I did a film with Luigi Nono in Venice, and it was shown, believe it or not, on BBC One between snooker and Songs of Praise. That's a bizarre combination. And nobody liked it, absolutely nobody. Everyone said it was cold and distant and everything. And so you just put it aside. You think, okay, fine, I didn't get it, fine, on to the next thing. And we had I had a copy of the film, of course, and I had to go in about I suppose about 1980 or thereabouts to Los Angeles, to the University of Southern California, where they wanted to run a retrospective of my films. And anything to get me a free trip to California and out of that damned office. And the film that got the most interest was the No-No.
Right.
And it proved to me that it's not a good idea to keep on revising things because people don't seem to like it.
Yeah.
If you like it, leave it alone.
That's a really good lesson.
Oh, I think
actually, so. I'm going to take that back to my students and actually say that to them, because obviously you need to listen to feedback and criticism, but actually there comes a point when if you believe in the piece, and I so understand what you're saying about the context. That's hilarious that it was between the snooker and songs of praise. It's funny in a funny kind of way. That reminds me of being the contemporary composer on a mixed program with like massive like masterpieces by Haydn or something either side of it, and you sort of your piece is there, and actually it's quite difficult to make it speak in that setting. I
remember David Matthews saying at the Preston Festival once that he had one of his many quartets, number 11 or 12 or 13, played in a concert which began with a Haydn quartet and ended with a Bartók Fourth Quartet. He said it was like being hung on a crucifix between two, not thieves exactly, but two infinitely superior composers.
Yeah.
But it's one of the things, I don't know whether it gets...
Oh, sorry, Barry. What was the name of the No-No film, the Nono film?
It's called Vive a Venezia. Oh. It was made at a time when Death in Venice was all the rage. He hated Death in Venice, and he wanted to be alive in Venice, and so we went all around the back and looked at the workshops and the boat builders and things like that. You ought to have a copy of it at some point.
I'd love to. That sounds great.
It's quite short. It's about half an hour, I suppose, about 35 minutes. It's one of the problems that you face sometimes. I'd spoken to him on the phone, obviously, and said, could we come? And he said, yes, he'd be fine. But when we got there, he absolutely said, I don't speak English, which is not true. But nevertheless, he didn't speak English for us. So I had to interview him in Italian, or rather, I would ask questions and he would reply in Italian. And eventually, fortunately, my assistant on the film spoke very good Italian, and she made the transcripts. So, and I had them read by an actor who was a wonderful actor called Alfred Burke, who was mad about modern music. You'd see him at all Sinfonietta concerts. He's gone now, but that notion of finding, I mean, we had 3 days in Venice in which to make the film, 3 I suppose, and you've got to be concentrated. It's no good arriving on location and saying, let's do a long shot over there, or not sure what to do next, because the crew begins to quake. You're supposed to know what you're doing, supposed. Anyway. So it's a good idea to and sometimes the notion of cyclic things is very useful. Musical, after all. I mean, the Jonathan Harvey film begins and ends in the same place after a journey through all the other things. So it ends with him sitting in that, or rather standing at the window with them. And that sort of, it's interesting. I mean, this is something which I have to be careful about, because I'm supposed to make a film. It's my idea, so I can't really avoid it. With David Matthews, the brother of Colin, of course, and I put it off from last year. I wasn't very well, and the Brian Elias film was overrunning. So it didn't get made. And then when I looked at what I'd written, I thought, God, this is boring. This is absolutely a film by numbers. I wake up, I can't do this. I must, and this is true. Every time you tackle something, you want to find a new way of doing it, because you've spent, in my case, 50 odd years doing it the wrong way, or finding out, learning from your mistakes. As the thing said, I think it was a favourite quotation of Simon Rattle from from Samuel Beckett. Try, fail, try again, fail again, better. Well, that's quite good. So so now I sat down up in Wales and I completely rewrote it. I mean, there's nothing apart from the interview, which I'd already done. I'm trying to find a shape that will actually boost the music, because if you don't find a shape that will actually reveal the music, it's a tendency to become ordinary and to become the accompaniment to the pictures, which is very easy. Anyway, we'll see.
Well, we have to get you back to Jackie quite soon, I think. Because
she's going to be there at 1.
Oh, 1, okay.
Yeah, as long as you can waste that, spend that amount of time, spend that amount of time.
Yeah. But the result of the process of working on those and that kind of Beckettian way is like these jewels that you've created, which I'm just so grateful that you've shared with me.
Well,
and in turn I'm able to share with our students at Sussex.
I share them with me, first of all. People sometimes say, who did you make this film for? And I say, for me.
Brilliant.
Who else? I mean, I'd like other people to like it too.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if someone says to you, what did you write that piece for? I said, well, I wrote it for me. Or more often, I got a commission. You know, the famous story of Malcolm Arnold going to Vienna and being interviewed by the press, and they said, why do you write music? He said, for money. And somebody said, oh, that's a very low response. What do you think Beethoven would have said? And Arnold went, pardon? But it's finding things that spark you off, you know. And although I'm a lot slower than I used to be, the films, interestingly enough, are slower too. They were interested to hear what you think about that, because they tended to be pretty busy at one stage. Allegro, molto allegro seemed to be the matter. Nowadays it appears to be andante or even adagio. That could be a sign of us being an old fart, of course. But nevertheless, you know, you find things gradually. The longer you look at things, the more remarkable they are.
Well, you had that quality of being able to listen to both the, it seems to me anyway, listen to what the composers were saying, kind of create the space for that, and also listen to the music and somehow merge that with the images. That's what I take from the Harvey films, which, to be honest, I know the best.
Yes.
You know, that sense of the views of the downs, and then the kind of extraordinary sort of electricity of the Mortuos Plango music at the same.
Yes.
You know, it's really, really, really unexpected but beautiful.
Well, I wanted it to be. I've never ever believed in that notion that people who write what they think of as important books, and they write them very badly because it doesn't matter about style. It always matters about style, and they've got to be living things, whether it be films, music, whatever. They've got to have some kind of understanding of the composer, if it's a composer. That's why the Colin Matthews film was, he loved it. I was terrified. It's one of the difficulties of writing, making a film about somebody you know nothing about is difficult. Making a film about somebody you've known for 35 years and know most of what he's done is even more difficult. Because you think, where am I going to go? And we fell way behind with the schedule. The film was going to be shown 2 years ago in Aldborough. And 2 weeks before the showing, I had to ring Colin's wife, who was subsidising the film. So I'm a bit worried. I don't think we might be ready. Oh God! I thought, no, just let us leave it to us. We'll see. And it came to an interesting point where we only had about 5 days left, and I said to my editor, I don't know. We've got 3 more music sequences to do here. Let's cut straight to the end. So the 3 music sequences disappeared. I can't even remember what they were anymore, so obviously they could disappear. But nevertheless, we got the film. It would be the equivalent of an art exhibition where the paintings were still slightly tacky, slightly to the touch. Anyway, he loved the film. He was absolutely ecstatic about it, which obviously I was very pleased by. And he made for me. I refused to be paid for doing it because I knew him so well. It was like asking a friend to pay for your lunch or something. Ridiculous. He said, "You've got to give you something." I said, "Well, I'll leave it to you. If you find something." And eventually, though he composed on a Sibelius, he sat down and with infinite care wrote the first page, only the first page, of one of the Debussy preludes which he had orchestrated. Les sons et les parfums tournent dans l'air du soir, which is a beautiful one, in fact. And that arrived in the most beautiful frame, and it sits right next to my desk, actually, and he wrote it with, he said, "Thank God I didn't have to write any more of it. It was going to drive me mad." I said, "You composed it." Somebody who I want to work with is Howard Skempton. Howard is a fascinating man. For a man who writes short pieces, on the phone he talks for an hour and a half. And he's just done just had recorded by an MC a version of the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. It's very good, sung by Roddy Williams. Terrific. So I want to do something with him at some point. We'll see. Anyway.
That's wonderful, Barrie. Thank you very much. And I think it's amazing that there's so much appreciation of your work from the composers themselves. Not amazing, that's the wrong word. It's just like absolutely
I'm always
just
amazed.
correct.
I'm always amazed.
Yeah. And very interesting.
There are very few composers who have actually openly said. I mean, they may have felt it. Said, "Bloody hell." I do remember working with John Adams on a performance of the Sherman Dances for a series called Sinfonietta 2, which has a Takamitsu film in it too. And we shot it in the Hammersmith Palais de Danse, where it is always equipped with the most enormous machines that go up and down and colours that revolve and dry ice and everything. And we played this when we finished the last take. I let everything go. I let the whole thing, and I heard through the gloom John saying, "What on earth does this man think my music is all about?" But he's a nice man. He's okay,
and I'm sure he appreciated it in the end.
I can only hope. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Okay, we probably should stop there. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.